What is up, guys? It is Tony here, and today we're taking a look at the Mac Pro benchmarks for the Mac Pro 4,1 to 5,1 upgrade, going from the 8-core to the 12-core, going from a 7950 with 3 gigs of VRAM to a RX 580 with 8 gigs of VRAM. We're going to start off here with the Geekbench 4 benchmark. And as you can see, we got the 2100 and 11,000 on the multi-score. It's not too bad of a score for Geekbench 4, but it's definitely falling behind on Geekbench 5. I've done a test before. It is very low. It's like 2,000. So it is very behind the curve for multi-core performance. So let's go ahead and boot into Windows and show you what it does on the gaming end of things.
Alright, so now we're going to do some gaming benchmarks. But here's the thing. With this machine, it's kind of hard to even run benchmarks because this computer runs awfully. So it just auto-detected me to medium. So let's see how medium runs. Let's trust auto-detect. So right now we're pulling 50 FPS, which, gonna be completely honest with you guys real quick, you might have noticed in my demeanor that I was kind of expecting this game to run horribly. And it's kind of stuttering a little bit. I gotta be honest, this game didn't even run on low before at all. Like, it would literally just be stuttering constantly, like 10 frames a second type stuff. And this game's actually running a lot better. And I'm trying to think, because we're on my original hardware, the same hardware that it used to run awful on. I think it's because of 5.1. I actually just flashed it to 5.1. And I think 5.1 actually increased my Sapphire 7950's performance. It like opened it up. Maybe I'm not in too much of need of a graphics upgrade as much as a CPU upgrade. So we're gonna start off, like I said, with the CPU upgrade, and we're gonna see how much of an improvement that has on its own, and then we're gonna pop in the big boy RX 580 and see if that even helps my performance at all on the games I play. Because as you can see, like, this is 60 FPS right here. All right, before we go ahead and switch to the new CPU, I just want to quickly see how City Skylines runs, because this game could be very CPU intensive and not so much GPU intensive. And I like this game a lot, but it never runs on this machine that smoothly. Maybe 5.1 improved it, but let's take a look. And we're running at 23, 25 FPS right now. And we're paused. So 21 FPS unpaused, dropping down to 18 occasionally. And believe it or not, this is how I play City Skylines. I play it looking like this, looking a little choppy, a little stuttery.
Alright, so as you guys can see, huge bump in single core and multi-core performance. About 7,000 points on multi-core and 700 on single core, actually 1,700 on single core. And I want to draw your attention to the memory score, which has jumped 500 points. That's 20% of a jump in performance on memory.
Alright, so it looks like Windows is recognizing the two processors just fine. So here we are back on Fallout 4 with the 12-core processor installed, and we're going to go ahead and take a look. Now, right off the bat is the same gameplay as before. 60 FPS, smooth, smooth as it could be for 50, 60 FPS. And I gotta admit, I am not experiencing that random occasional stutter that like made the 50 FPS not feel like 50 FPS. That's the thing, if you have 50 FPS reading in your frame rate count, okay, so there's a little bit of the hanging up. So it did start to happen as I walked into this town, but it isn't like constantly happening every time I load anything in. So we're definitely going to need that RX 580 in here. And that's the next step. We're going to test out the 580. But really quickly, let's go ahead and show how much City Skylines improved. All right, so let's go ahead and see what this 12 core can do. Alrighty, so here we are in City Skylines. And right off the bat, remember how we were running 20 plus FPS paused before? Now we're hitting nearly 30 FPS paused. And when we're unpaused, we're at north of 20. So we went from getting like 15, 12 frames per second to getting 23. So we've gained 10 frames a second on this game just by upgrading the CPU. Because these CPUs do match up with a lot of the i5 6 cores of current gen, 11th gen, 10th gen, the more current gens. So not too shabby at all. So yeah, sitting here right now, zoomed out at 25 FPS. That's boding pretty well, obviously, for once we put the RX 580 in. All right, so here we are with the Radeon RX 580. We also have the Intel Xeon 5670 at 2.93 gigahertz. I'm not sure if it's recognizing that it is two co-processors. It is saying that the CPU is bottlenecking the GPU slightly. There is one game I have where both of these components do not meet the recommended. They meet minimum requirements. That's Borderlands 3. So let's go ahead and try this out. Let's test this out and see how this setup, which is probably the best it's going to get for me right now, is going to run these games. Let's start off with the game that should give this setup the least issue. It actually seems like the CPU is going to be the bottleneck, so I'm going to turn quality to ultra. Pretty much just like before, pinned to 60 FPS. Except remember, before we were running at medium. So we're pretty much getting the same performance bumped up to ultra. So we just turned this computer into a 60 FPS medium Fallout 4 machine, which is kind of pitiful for Fallout 4, to a machine that could run ultra smoothly, 60 FPS, 120 hertz, no problem. And that's pretty awesome. This feels really freaking smooth. So, big fan of that. All right, next up, City Skylines, which of course we were running before at, I believe, 30-ish FPS, low graphics settings. This game, everyone knows, even though AMD software says I have the recommended specs for it, City Skylines doesn't know what they're talking about. Their recommended specs are way lower than this thing needs, and it's mostly because this game isn't really well optimized, and it uses a lot of resources. It uses a lot of the CPU resources. So let's throw our qualities up, everything up to high. This game always lags out when I turn up texture quality, even on the menu. That's what I'm saying. This game is very poorly optimized. So right now, remember, when we were playing before, we had low settings. Now we're at high and very high. And at high and very high, we are, again, just like with Fallout, matching the performance of low settings without the 580 with the Sapphire card. So we've basically turned this computer into more of an ultra machine, a machine that could run games at ultra, probably with the exception of current gen games, right? So anything that's a last gen game is going to be able to run on ultra on this machine, which is kind of what I do. That's kind of what I like to play, is last gen games. But one that I really do want to play that I downloaded recently is Borderlands 3. The Sapphire couldn't dream of running this game. So let's go ahead and see how the 580 fares, especially with this 12-core chip. I actually do remember that, yes, I did play this game a little bit. I played it, I believe, did I play it on my M1 Mac? Or I don't think this runs on the M1 Mac. But I did play it, and you can see I had the settings very low when I did play it. So I'm gonna leave this there, okay? Because this whole game is already like just on the menus is running a little sluggish. So let's get into it. Everything's loading in, the textures look awful. But there they are, there's the textures. Okay, the game's running a little choppy, but I'm reading 40, 50 FPS, strangely enough. Oh, there we go. It's smooth now. Honestly, the textures don't look terrible. Looks pretty playable to me, actually. And now, for some reason, it's at 60 plus FPS, and it seems a lot smoother. So, okay, I'm just gonna run around. So I don't think I have a vehicle yet. Now we're at 70 FPS. We're at 70, 80.
Real quickly, I want to mention that, a lot of this had to do with the hard drive. This is a 5400 RPM, 32 meg cache, old school spinning hard disk. So I think the textures are very large file sizes and took a minute to load in.
This is buttery smooth, honestly. And it looks great on the high refresh rate. Feels super responsive, which means I could probably knock this up to medium and get something decent. So let's see. Try medium. So at medium, I'm getting more like 70 FPS, in the 70s, but it's not even really going down. Is that updating instantly? It is. So let's go to high now. At high, we're now immediately and officially just at 60. So we're at like 55 to 60 FPS. But again, I would say this is pretty playable. Let me throw a grenade. Or something, get some action going. Oh, did I just blow that up by shooting it? All right, so now we're at high and the game looks stupendously better. I gotta admit that. So we're gonna go ahead and get into some action here. See, I'm really not dropping frames at all. That is nice. I actually did not expect to be able to play Borderlands 3 on high. Because it seems like I was able to play low, like completely low settings with my 3 gigabyte card. It seems like this 8 gigabyte card just blows it out of the water. So that's pretty good. So that means I should probably be able to play some of the current gen games medium to high with this setup. And this setup cost me a grand total of $280. That's less money than a current gen console to upgrade my Mac Pro to current gen, potential. Now, am I gonna get ray tracing? I don't think so. And you will get ray tracing on the current gen consoles. But if that's not that big of a deal to you, and you already have a machine that you could put a RX 580 into, so let's say you have a Mac that you could set up an eGPU with a 580 and you already have a CPU that's equivalent to mine, this is a really good way to go. It also kind of increases the longevity of this machine for being used for work, because it's definitely increased the power I'm gonna have in Final Cut and in Logic Pro. But obviously I'd rather be using the M1 for that, because M1's always going to beat out Intel on those apps. But I do like having a relatively modern, up-to-date Intel machine, and that's what this is going to serve as for the next year, maybe two. And for $280, break it down over a year or two, that's not too bad of a monthly cost to have a badass Intel machine just for now. And I gotta admit, this game looks beautiful in high. So, overall, very impressed with the performance of this machine. Did not expect to be running this game at high. In fact, just for the fun of it all, let's go ahead and go to badass. I just went to badass. Okay, so we're on badass right now. I don't even know what that is. It has motion. I don't like the motion blur, but oh my god. This is higher than ultra, and it seems to be running pretty well. It's running at 40 FPS right now. Okay. Even with that explosion, it's still holding that? Wow. I'd want to turn motion blur off. I don't know why that turns on. Maybe because some people benefit from it because their frames aren't that good. They figured. But no, for me, turn that off. Oh yeah, so motion blur off. Oh, this is smooth. Oh, it's a little, oh, it dropped right there for a second. Dropped the frame for a second there. So I'd probably be running personally at ultra. But how much better does ultra look than high? Looks pretty good, but I think high looked as good. Yeah, I think high looked as good. So, all right, I don't know why I'm doing this to you guys. Anyway, that's it. That's the quick little test. Seems like this is gonna run on high smoothly and, you know, like at competitive levels of frames per second with no drops. But if you wanna make it look really pretty on current gen games, you are gonna have to drop some frames, which is not a big sacrifice considering it's, you know, a $280 investment. It's not a huge investment to upgrade to these settings. So there you go. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.